We are back, episode 7. Very important this week. You don't have a drink, but I'm back to being sponsored by Monster Energy. In the last few weeks, we've talked about letting a sort of technology be technology, making more room for human connection. We've talked about tool usage. We're going to bring a couple of those things together this week, at least for where we start, and then we're going to see where we go. Over the last week, we've had all these conversations. Both of us come from consulting in the last decade. Yeah. Both of us are still in consulting. The conversations that we have had is that with AI tools, they basically do 80 or 90% of the work to get you to good enough. A lot of times when you're hired, companies hire you to make things, at least on the experience side, useful, usable, and good enough in a lot of times. It's probably bad to admit that. If AI tools can get us to 80% where it's almost good enough, that means clients can do it themselves. That means we're obviously pushed for efficiency. But it also means that last 10% or that last 20%, that's really why you come to a consultancy now. Or I don't want to say consultancy, to a digital business transformation, to a design studio. Yes, it's a skill that you don't have. Large companies a lot of times won't have that level of craft. I actually really love that because it allows us to play in a realm where our expertise becomes valued again.
Yeah, so I think we're starting to see a redefinition of what does craft mean. And this has led me down some quite interesting rabbit holes recently. And I'm a big fan of two current or reasonably current theories, one from Daniel Kahneman's System 1 and System 2 thinking.
That's the slow and fast thinking?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And then more recently, thanks to your recommendation, reading The Art of Impossible by Steve Kotler, starting to think about flow states. And I think what we're seeing with large language models and with AI is you're absolutely right. We are raising the bar of what a layperson is capable of. That 80%, it's quite easy with a little bit of training to get something very credible, good enough out. But I completely agree that the differentiation, particularly when it comes to business to consumer models or even business to business, that differentiation to allow yourself to step outside of what everybody else is doing, it needs to come from a definite expertise. So my point, I'll start with this and then see where you take it, is that I think we're transitioning away from the need to spend 20 years building a deep domain capability, a deep domain craft, into a balance of a good understanding of structure, architecture, and theory, whether that's technical architecture or design architecture, and then balancing it with this very trained idea of cognitive orchestration and using your LLM as effectively an extension of your own brain, like a modern day cyborg, to use it as an extension and reduce your cognitive overload and build you this repository of capability, which you can then steer and draw from. So my point I'll pass back to you is I think we're going to see a new age where fluid intelligence, and we downplayed the importance of IQ for a long time, but I think fluid intelligence is absolutely going to be what makes the best stand out from the rest.
I love fluid intelligence, but I feel like, I don't know where you got some of the words that you've been using. What else was cognitive orchestration?
That's my new one. I claim that one.
Okay, I forgot what I trademarked last time. Okay. But cognitive orchestration, where did fluid intelligence come from? Because I'm dying here.
Fluid intelligence is a known term for how do you raw intelligence, if you like.
I just say flexibility and agility. What's the difference?
But IQ's been derided for a long time as the only people who care about IQ tests are people who've done IQ tests and got a good score, and they brag about it, and everyone's don't tell people your IQ. But actually, I think it's a good measure of how you can process in a number of different ways, and it's a very good indicator of someone who's able to take a large language model and use it effectively, because you're drawing from lots of different things. You're not necessarily having the deep capability that a large language model can provide to you, but you're able to pick and choose and steer, spot hallucinations, spot cyclic reasoning more easily than someone who isn't necessarily strong in this area.
Here's where I'm going to take it.
Cool.
In the last week, we've also been having these conversations with what you called orchestration. I will somewhat step back and reterm that. With AI tools, you can extend your capabilities to areas that you wouldn't normally have. So for example, on the user experience side, I can now start to extend into engineering more than I have before. I can start to extend into product management more, product ownership more than I have before. And I think that creates the ability to have smaller teams do a broader set of work. So if I was hiring, frankly, I do get to be responsible for a lot of what we hire at Sapient and how we're changing our organizational structure. One of the things that I'm starting to think about is, if I am building out a team, how am I hiring UX individuals that have, to your point, I'll say a fluid intelligence mindset or a more agile mindset, where they're coming in and they have raw intelligence with a UX sort of slant or determination, but they can start to use all these other tools. Now, where I think this gets hung up, we talked about how that you can get 80% of the way to be good enough, or 80% of the way there. So now I can use all these tools. I can get 80% of the way there. But at some point, as you get more senior, there's this threshold that I think people hire you for deep expertise around one individual area. So as I'm 10, 15, 20 years in, you're hiring me for expertise around engineering, like technical architecture. You're hiring me for user experience and how do you have that craft and that emotion and that story. There is then a challenge that we have where, let's say, the first 10 years, and I'm making these numbers up, but the first 10 years, you have this generalization of skills. How do you ever learn the depth that you need? And I think you do need that depth eventually. I'll come back to something you said. Now I have my pen and my paper here so I can take notes. You called up The Art of the Impossible.
Yeah.
I forgot who was it by?
Steven Kotler.
Perfect. Also wrote Stealing Fire, also wrote Rise of Superman. Great books. One of the things he talks about across his books is the need to get the basics. That at some point with user experience, with engineering, you need to know the basics in order to really get the advanced part. It feels like we will not get the basics in the way that we are going. How can you ever advance to the advanced side of things? How do you make that switch over from a generalist to expertise based?
It's a really interesting question, and I don't have a good answer for you, but I'll come at it from a slightly different angle. So part of me thinks that we are genuinely going to see a threat to the deep craft specialists, because as we build up our repositories of knowledge through openly available large language models, but also proprietary models, because I think every consultancy is building their own capability which isn't accessible to the public, that is based on their own sweet spot of knowledge. So everybody's building up these AIs which are trained in how they do things. I think we are going to see a threat to that craftsman, that specialist, in terms of that deep, raw repository of knowledge that they can bring to bear. However, what I think differentiates them is that the really good people have spent the entirety of their career being curious and playing with things. So a technologist, for example, will know multiple languages. They will have got the basics, if you like, in terms of things like architecture of solutions, of things like databases, how you put together code in a sensible, intelligent, object-oriented way, for example. And I think the same is true in experience design, that there are paradigms and best practices which you learn along the way, and you stay fresh if you're good at what you do. The danger becomes when you start to rest on your laurels and say, I've done 30 years and so I don't need to learn anymore. I don't need to be hands-on anymore. I just do what I do. Because the longer you do that, the less relevant you get and the less or the more stagnant you get. So the good people keep playing, stay curious, and that attitude to new developments has a direct effect on the brain. It encourages neuroplasticity in the brain, encourages formation of new ideas, refactoring synapses. And that is exactly what's useful for this cognitive orchestration idea of how you join together different problems and be able to move that flexibly between things. So I think, yes, there's a threat, but they're the ideal people to combat it.
If I reorient what you said in a way, and tell me if this is right. So we just mentioned AI tools will get us 80 or 90% of the way there. That last 10%, that's the craft that you hire expertise in. I don't know if this is exactly the same, but I almost feel like the top of the pyramid, the top 10%, whatever that might be, it is less defined by intelligence, tools, or skills, and more defined by the mindset those individuals have. And if I expand upon that, and then I'll pitch it back to you, as I'm going about being a generalist, as I am learning things, I have naturally met people through my career that are more curious. They treat a career as lifelong learning. And I have also met plenty of people that will say, I've been doing this for 20 years.
Yeah.
As soon as somebody says, I have been doing this for 20 years, a switch in my brain goes off and says, I'm not listening to you anymore.
Yeah, or I'm going to poke it and see where it falls apart.
But yeah, because that means you cannot stand on the merits of your argument, and you are falling back to a defensive position.
Yeah.
To me, maybe it's an intern or a junior designer. I'm watching stuff from Config where the people presenting are 25, and I'm thinking there is so much I have to learn from these people.
Constant threat.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So then in that case, it becomes the mindset that really differentiates these people. And I'll wrap up this thought by saying the people that I have known that go out and get PhDs, those are the people that are at the top because they constantly crave two things. One, continued learning, and two, this desire to extend human knowledge in some way, that I need to know something so deep that I can talk about it so clearly that I can push the boundaries.
Yeah.
So for all the people that are working in user experience and engineering, the people that will probably rise to the top are the ones that have that mindset that are always pushing. So you have or a skill set of generalization for the first 10 years, but those people, as you said, they are learning the basics, they are learning the heuristics, they're getting all of these, and at some point, they're going to naturally just move into this territory of specialization because they will crave and want more information.
Yes.
So then the future becomes more about mindset over skill.
Yeah, I completely agree. Don't get me wrong. I do think the ability to do that is governed by your level of intelligence. I think the more people who tend to excel more in these IQ type tests find that mindset easier to create and easier to maintain. I see there's a lot of tendency using large language models to fall into easy answers mode and take the first answer and roll with it. And I see that happening a lot. It's the people who are more curious around it that I think end up with a better output. I think this is really relevant for both of us, actually, as we've both got a remit to build teams. And I'm going to come back to what you were saying about how do you balance these sort of old war horses who've been doing this for 30 years versus these young whippersnappers who are going out there and pushing the boundaries. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. But when I'm building a team, I need a balance of both because I want the guys who've got the craft. They're still curious. They've still got that maker mindset. They're still hands-on. I don't want them to be hands-on. That's only in emergencies. But they've still got that ability and desire to build things, not just steer other people. But I also want the people who are straight out of college who don't know what's not possible and will just push boundaries and who might just achieve it anyway because they don't know it shouldn't be doable. And I think when you balance those up, one keeps the other set hungry and the other one gives them, the more juniors, the tools to steer effectively.
In that case, I think the appropriate question is, how do you build, or what's the type of organization that you need to build for the company that you are within? And how I'll explain this, when I was running my own design studio, we were never going to scale to hundreds of people.
Yeah.
We were 15, 20 people. We always wanted to hire that type of mindset, that growth, that aggression may be too harsh a word, but that drive that people would have. It was less about, oh, I need to get promoted to be this executive or to be this director. It was more about, I'm working with really intelligent people doing amazing work. And in that case, it worked. When you're in a corporation, a large company, when it's 50,000 people, a lot of people join for career path, for advancement. In that case, then you do need people who are naturally going to be more driven because those are going to be the ones that, at the front of the curve. But you also need people that are just stable. And it is absolutely fine in that case. No, I don't want to say it because people have different priorities.
They do.
My priority is towards work and I get excitement around that. That brings me life. For other people, their priority is family or community. They just want a job to support the family side of things, their outside life, and that's absolutely fine. If you have a team of 100 people or 200 people, you need the middle of that to be, or the foundation of that to be, people who maybe don't always want to be the most driven, aggressive, I have to move up. Because naturally, not everybody is going to get promoted to be a director, and you need people who are very happy to be senior designers. And that's awesome because they're going to be great in that role. So that's how I look at it is, and there's all sorts of different organizational setups that you can have. But I think the organization that you build is based on the need of the company and the structure that you are within.
Yeah, that's interesting. I like that. So I've long held the opinion that you need to do your time at each level of a career. And I used to run big project management teams. And I always said to project managers who are genuinely very talented, when they're pushing for promotion, it's not so much about the skills that you're showing. It's about you need to put in your time at that level to deliver a number of projects and see some go wrong. Because a lot of project management is about how do you fix things when things do go wrong? How do you bring it back onto the straight and narrow? And that it gets challenging. So if you've raced through the senior project management route and said, look, I've delivered some big things, they're at the right monetary value, they're with the right team size, and they've all been great, that's good. I want to see you deal with a project that's gone wrong, that's gone badly wrong, and maybe not through any fault of your own. Hopefully it is through a fault of your own because you learn from that. Yeah. But I want to see you learn from the failures. So let me give you one idea before I pass it back.
Sure.
Which is that when you have a team that you've built with people who are driven for promotion, I think the balance is, I like to find people who want to build things, who want to create value, rather than chasing promotion necessarily. They're driven by the need to create something valuable that they can look back on in their career and say, that is what I achieved. I know that's what motivates me. And I think the challenge with finding people like that is hanging on to them. I can think of, there's a few people in my career that I've been lucky enough to have on my teams. There's one in particular, I'm thinking about a junior project manager that I took a chance on bringing into the team. They were one of the hungriest, most motivated people I've ever worked with. And they're now the founder of a company and they're doing excellent. I'm sure if they're watching this, they know who I'm talking about. But the trick is finding those people, giving them enough to get their teeth into it and hanging on to them. You'll never hang on to them for long, but I'd rather build a team of people who are they're driven for a fixed period of time, knowing that at some point they're going to grow beyond what you've got, and just use them while you can.
So many things I'm going to respond to. I'm going to start with the first about you need to, I don't necessarily agree that you need to spend time at level, but what you said that you need to see different challenges at level.
Yeah, okay.
So let's say that you're moving up from junior to mid-level to senior to director, and you're doing everything perfect. You get up to director. Now, when things go wrong, you don't know how to handle it because you've never struggled. That is a skill set that I think is beautifully presented because it is something that AI can't correct. And we keep coming back to talking about all these AI
There's
issues.
no accountability in it.
But there's a human factor that no matter how many AI tools that you're using and how many agents that you're using, at some point the human factor is going to come into play. Right now, I'm working with, I would say, a challenging client. I'm actually really enjoying it. I think a lot of people see this and they're like, oh, a challenging client, I don't want that. For me, it's great because it's great to practice how do you meet the challenges that are being presented to you and being thrown at you.
Yeah.
And they're not asking for, I would say, insane, crazy asks. What they are doing is demanding things that will get them on the road to what they see as success. I want to figure out how we deliver against that. Are quite intense, but to me, this is great because it is allowing myself, the team that I'm working with, all of us to get much tighter and much better and much stronger. It shows how you take ownership. It shows how you solve things. It shows how you work with the team, how you work with empathy, all of these things. Anytime something bad happens, I think it's so much nicer to say, good. What can I learn from this? What can I pick up from this? Instead of just saying, I always want win after win, you have to have some failures.
You need your war stories.
Yeah, to see how do you progress a team when there is a sense of impending failure? How do you guide a team through a very challenging time where morale might be down, or your back is against the wall. That is just as important. With all that we talk about with AI, we talk about how AI is going to have efficiency and output and all of these. That human side, still so critical.
Yeah, I agree. I know I'd rather have a passionate, involved, challenging client than a disinterested, passive client who's just ticking boxes, not really reading reviews. I think we're all here. We've got choices that we make in our careers to do valuable, important things. I'd rather work with other people who want to do that, even if they're not the easiest people to get along with.
The more somebody challenges you, the better you are going to have to be. If you do not want to be challenged, then fine, cool, then stay at level.
Yeah.
And this goes back to something that
and
you were
that's okay.
saying.
That's absolutely okay.
Yeah, it is. It is, right? Not everybody wants to be the first sort of person running into the burning building.
Yeah.
Not everybody wants to face that. What you said about chasing promotion, I really liked, because for me, it's always been, what wins are you delivering? And how I've looked at my career personally isn't necessarily about getting promotion. It is about what are the interesting stories that I have. Honestly, if I had stayed at Microsoft where I started, I would probably be in a better, let's say, level position. I would definitely be in a better financial position, but I would not have nearly the stories. The fact that I've gotten to live and work all over the world has been so huge on my personal learning for culture, for being able to spend so many trips and so many years in different countries has blown me away. Like I always think about my career in terms of, if I'm going to write a memoir, I want really interesting stories. And to me, that was about moving all over the world. So I don't know how we got on this from AI, but now we're just going off of stories of our lives.
But I share that. That's why I've always said, I've got an attitude of always say yes to adventure and see where it takes you. And things either always work out or you find a way to make them work out, one of the two.
I'm going to bring it back to AI tools, actually. What you just said, that sense of adventure. You have it, I have it. I wonder if that's also something that why we're in this studio talking about AI tools now. You have a lot of people, a lot of designers I know are not necessarily interested in learning AI tools.
I know a lot who are actively against AI tools.
Yeah, a lot of people are like, oh, that's not going to take my job. For anyone who's been listening to this podcast or whatever we're calling this, we never talk about AI taking your jobs. That's the wrong conversation to have. It is all about how you're working with this and what AI can do for you. Tons of different stuff, lots of videos that we've done. My thing is, we are here because both of us are out in front. We're like, we don't know what's going to happen, but my God, is it interesting to just play with all these tools, just see what all of these tools can do. Now, for me, starting in the last few days, I've been using, I think the app is Super Whisper. I might have sent it to you.
Okay.
It's a dictation tool, but it helps you. You can just...
I know Whisper, so it's probably built on that then. So Whisper's a library.
Maybe. Okay. And now I'm using it. So I'm using that, and then I'm using it in ChatGPT, where I just start dictating things, and then I say, can you format it like this or format it like that? Things like that have helped me put together frameworks and structures, because I will just monologue for 5 minutes, and I'm not really sure where I'm going with it. And then that will help me congeal things. And
so
how I got to that.
But this is a good topic, because I wanted to pick up with you on the idea of voice input as an input for AI. And I'm not a big fan, and I'll tell you why.
You're wrong.
Let's see. So, it might just be horses for courses. It might be it suits you, but it doesn't suit me. So I deliberately don't use voice, because when I talk, I tend to think as I talk, and I refine what I'm saying, and I revisit things. And sometimes the things I say are incorrect, and I want to recut them. So when I work with a large language model, I find I can type almost as fast as I can talk. So I tend to type, see things I don't like, edit them, and then I input it into the large language model. So I've refined it before I actually get the output. So what I'm doing is, effectively, if I go back to the idea of system 1, system 2 thinking, I'm using my system 1 thinking, which is my automatic processing, because I'm talking about things that I know, but I don't necessarily have the deep system 2 capabilities. For example, Python language, while I'm dealing with a large language model that's coding for me, I don't have the deep syntactical knowledge around how that language is structured. But what I'll do by using a typed input is I will effectively put a little veneer of system 2 thinking on this deep process that the large language model is doing, because I'll curate and I'll edit and I'll prompt engineer and I'll refine. So that I like that approach. If I do voice, I find I can't do that as easily.
Okay, here's where I'll push back on that.
Yeah.
I often do the same. I would type a lot out and then I would go back and recursively refine it. What I found as I am able to monologue 3 minutes or 5 minutes is I can then ask ChatGPT or whatever, Super Whisper, to say, give me 2 or 3 different outputs on this, where one output indexes on this idea and another output indexes on this other idea.
Yeah.
What you're doing, I think, refines it towards one output that you have in mind. Where I'm trying to take it is, what could the input that I just gave you look like through different lenses? And I found that has helped me think through different ideas at deeper levels and even generate ideas that I didn't necessarily think of at the beginning.
There's a different approach. I quite like it.
You always talk about don't take the first answer.
No, absolutely. And I do go off on tangents with it. But what I quite like about what you said is that when you start with a very broad playing field, I tend to start much narrower and then poke a bit within that. When you're starting a bit broader, you might well get some inputs that I hadn't thought of. So I might try that. I tell you why I don't do that is because I'm very conscious of the amount of contextual memory that a large language model has when you're working with it. So how much it can actively store and efficiently refer to when you're talking to it. And I hit that level quite a lot when I'm doing code. So I've started getting it to tell me, after the answer you're going to give me, tell me how you're doing in terms of performance, so I know when to switch to a new chat and give me a recommendation. So I will give it a big block of code and say, find the errors in this, or I don't like how that's working, give me some suggestions for how I could recut it based on a few things. And then at the end of it, tell me your performance, and it will come out with, here's an answer, and I'm at 90%, you're okay for the moment, or I'll come down, I'm at 40%, you probably want to switch to a new window. And that's the point where I see it start to slow down, I start to get a bit frustrated, so I switch a bit earlier now. And I found that that's working really well for me. The only danger is you need to be able to take the important elements from your massive conversation you've been having and transfer them to a new chat. So I get it to summarize itself to do that.
It's interesting how you think about working with the tools, because I've never thought about that. I've never thought about, what are the limits of the tools that I use until I hit something. And then I get a little bit cranky at it. I guess that goes back to that exploration side on how much you can do with things and how much you can chain together. I don't know. This is something I don't have as much experience in, because I think you're working with bigger data sets and more, and you're working with code. I'm working with a lot of times just my own thoughts and how I refine that. And it's, as we were talking about before we went on the air, I want to get into Cursor. I want to get into
You'll be lost Builder. As soon as you start.
Like, I did computer science work, but it was 20 years ago. So my knowledge is really poor, and my knowledge of IDEs is poor. I'm sure once I pick some stuff back up, I can start moving, but I do want to start to explore it just to see a little bit more on what I can do. However, the constant piece of feedback I've heard, everyone gets super excited by, oh my God, I can tell Cursor to build me this game. And it builds it in 15 minutes, right? Everybody's there. And we talked about this before with the App Store and with iOS. It was like a 12-year-old can make an app and my grandmother can make an app. Yeah, sure. It's like democratizing everything. And all of those apps suck. And it's like everything that you put out, all the game that you did in 15 minutes, it's not hitting the mark, because in order to refine, that's coming back to the beginning of the conversation. That's the 10% that's missing. The first 80% is super easy to get to. The last 20% is the part that you're pulling out your hair.
Yeah, and it is frustrating using them, particularly when you get to the point where things get quite complicated. You'll find you'll go to a point where I can hold this stuff in my head, I can move between different functions, different structure, and you get to a point where actually you can't, you become more reliant on the large language model to do that. And that's where clear architecture becomes important. But you can also get it to architect. Say, don't give me any code, just give me the architectural structure for what I want to do next. Break it into a framework that I can use to drive this, then give me the component pieces, and then we'll work on the component pieces one at a time. And that works very well.
Okay, I'll take it back to the beginning of the conversation. You said, what was the term you used for orchestration?
Cognitive orchestration.
Cognitive orchestration. This again goes back to why I don't believe in the AI will take our jobs, or at least I don't believe it if you are that top 10 or 20% of people. For the bottom 80%, I think AI creates more jobs because it creates more people who can create more things. At the top 10%, 20%, what AI can do is spit out a point solution really well, a website, an app, a game. None of these maybe are very good, but it can spit them out. What it can't do yet is that level of orchestration that if I am, again, a travel application, a health application, and I have 10, 12, 20 different touch points, and I have voice, and I have digital displays, and I have all these things, that level of orchestration, that level of data usage, that's not there yet.
Yeah.
And so I still think that's where you come back to being really good, and everyone's focused on efficiency, and that's the wrong conversation. That's a red herring. It is more about what do we want to build? How can AI advance us towards that?
Yes.
But where are the areas that deep expertise still comes into play? And I still fully believe, at least in the next 2 to 3, 5 years, even as much as things are progressing, we're still going to need that last 10% to make great experiences and great applications.
I think there's good reasons for that, though, because what humans do really well is lateral thinking based on subjective experience.
Yes.
And an AI can't do that. So, and this is what it comes back to, and it links to this idea of fluid intelligence. People who are able to think across topics and apply learnings from one area or applications from one area and how they might transform another unrelated area, we do that brilliantly. And until AIs have an experience model behind them to be able to connect this from their own learning, from their own experience, they will never be playing this field. This is why I think these cognitive orchestrators are the people who can join the dots between different areas, who can use a large language model to effectively replace their contextual memory. So you don't have to hold all of this deep knowledge in your own memory. You can have that matrix moment of, I know Kung Fu, and suddenly, because you've got an idea of when you want to go, the large language model holds that repository for you as long as you know how to use it. And I'm in two minds, to go back to one of your earlier points about what does that mean for the 20-year-old, 30-year-old experienced craft veteran? Do we need that? Are there shortcuts to get there? Because a lot of what we do to get that expertise is we go through a lot of mundane rubbish to actually build and reinforce that learning so we know our craft after 20 years of doing it. But if you could condense that into actually what are the key learnings from that, could we get there in a shorter period of time? And is that a new career path for an expert who only focuses on that and doesn't have that necessarily syntax knowledge of a certain language?
I think you can gain the knowledge in a much shorter amount of time. There is a level of wisdom that I think you gain over time because of what you said a few moments ago. The war stories, going through the good and the bad.
That's true.
You can teach, I'll go back since we were talking about Muay Thai. And I was just listening to some podcast where they're talking about boxing. And so it's all things together. And you can teach everybody, you can teach me or somebody like skills of boxing. You can teach them quicker, right? There are better methods that have been developed in how you teach this. And then you go back to the old Mike Tyson quote, which I will butcher, which is everybody has a plan until you get hit in the mouth.
Yeah.
And that's the part of wisdom. I don't know how you pull that into AI yet, but that is something to look at. And I think eventually, it'll get there, or it'll figure it out, or it will find its own way. But I'll give you the last word to wrap us up. How do you want to close us out here?
I'll give you an anecdote to close it out, which I've stolen from the Art of the Impossible book, which is around the idea of Tim Ferriss and his, I think, is it Tim Ferriss who did the BJJ training?
Yes, he did a lot of these different things. Yeah. I know exactly where you're going. I love it. Close us out.
So there's the idea that you could, I think, is it 5 days, you could learn enough to be 80% or good enough in anything you like. And he tried lots of things, some of them very dangerous things, and broke bones and gave himself serious injuries doing them. But one of the ones that really resonated with me was BJJ. He gave himself 5 days to compete in a BJJ tournament. And I think he did all right. And all he did was learn how to use a guillotine choke. Nothing else, but he learned how to use a guillotine choke in all different varieties, from the top, from the bottom, from side. And he got very good at that in 5 days, because that's all he could do. He didn't try and learn the whole art of jiu-jitsu. He just focused on one technique. And I really like that. I think there's a metaphor there that we could probably take into the different disciplines that we're using, particularly in digital, to say, look, if I do one thing really well and I rely on AI to support me around the edges, Could that be a way forward? Who knows?
I love it. We're done for the week. We're out. Talk to you next week.
Yeah, talk to you next week.
Bye.